So hi there folks, it's me Smotown, and this week's lore video is related to my last video on Guinevere's legacy, for I concluded that Guinevere and the Queen of Lothric are one and the same. This video will look at her royal bloodline through her marriage to the King of Lothric, Oceiros. We will examine the deluded king himself, along with their youngest, Ocelotte, before moving on to the twin princes as well. For me, the logical starting point when examining the royal family is by looking at the description of Prince Lothric's ashes, for they state, the Lothric bloodline was obsessed with creating a worthy heir, and when this proved impossible, resorted to unspeakable means. Suffice it to say, the path to linking the fire is a cursed one indeed. So a lot of lore there in one small paragraph, but we can take from this description that eugenics was first and foremost a concern of the royal family. It infers that it was for this purpose of linking the fire. Ironically, the worthy heir or Lord of Cinder we meet in game is neither particularly virile nor has any interest in linking the fire, but I will come to the Prince Lothric later. The head of the family, King Oceiros, was certainly no exception to this obsession, and would later become known as the Consumed King, consumed by his ambition to create a worthy heir. His soul tells us that Oceiros went mad trying to harness his royal blood for a greater purpose, leading him to the heretics of the Grand Archives, where he discovered the twisted worship of Seath the Pale Drake. Clearly, Oceiros, as the head of this dynasty, was obsessed to create an heir. The ashes tell us that the bloodline would eventually resort to unspeakable means to achieve this. This will obviously be a part reference to his worship of Seath the Pale Drake and all that came after. As I've said, I'll come on to Prince Lothric later, but at this point it's important to keep in mind that he was intended to be a warrior and a Lord of Cinder, whereas conversely, he was weak and feeble and cursed, and he would also reject his duty. To me, this is the type of failure that would lead to the bloodline resorting to unspeakable means. Oceiros was led to the Grand Archives following his many failures. But who were these heretics referred to? Well, most likely they were the Crystal Sages and the Scholars. These seem to have been cultists and researchers of the Pale Drake magic led by the Crystal Sages. And his sorceries, dating back to Big Hat Logan. We know that the Crystal Twins appear to have carried on his work, for the Crystal Scroll states, Secret Crystal Scroll of the Grand Archives of Lothric. These sorceries are the work of the Pale Drake Seath the Scaleless, whom Logan is said to have met, a branch of sorcery that has been carried on by the Crystal Sages. Crystal sorcery is therefore Seath's legacy, started by Logan when he came to the Duke Archives in Dark Souls 1. The Sage's Big Hat even tells us that the Crystal Twins are considered to be his successor, and we can see this not only with their works with crystal, but also with their very appearance, which obviously takes after Big Hat Logan. The twins studied the crystal magics carefully, and they concluded that Logan's enlightenment came from his contact with the primordial crystal, for the Crystal Soul Spear states, according to the Crystal Sages, old Big Hat achieved enlightenment within the Regal Archives, where he came to the quintessence of sorcery in the facets of a certain crystal, that being the primordial crystal from Dark Souls 1 that gives Seath the Scaleless his immortality. So not only did the Crystal Sages teach us about the magics itself, they also studied the origins of the magic and how Logan came to develop it. We also know that the twins experimented with the application of crystal with different objects. Their rapiers are a fine example of this, because their description states, the crystals boost the magic damage inflicted by the sword, and the item discovery of its wielder, fruit of a lifetime of research conducted by the sages. So, we know that they studied crystals their whole lives, and experimented with it in different ways. There is also evidence to suggest and infer that they experimented on Gertrude, who was imprisoned in the Grand Archives, and at the very least we know for sure they defiled her artefacts, for the crystal chime reads, "A sacred chime, once the possession of Gertrude, the heavenly daughter, and defiled by the scholars of the Grand Archives." The power of crystals granted the scholars a degree of success. In this case, their work enabled the chime to be suitable for casting both miracles and sorceries. This shows that Gertrude's possessions were used in experimentation. What is interesting here is the description makes it clear it was the scholars who were the ones that experimented with this, meaning the research into Seath, and most likely his heretical worship, was not limited to the twins, but was also prominent amongst the scholars. This is a substantial lore drop, for we know from the Ring of the Scholar that they represent one of the 3 pillars of the king's rule, maybe explaining why they have custody of the heretical Gertrude. However, they themselves are described as heretics in the Osiris soul description. I think that there is evidence that their heretical practices were known to the other 2 pillars, who distanced themselves from the scholar and strengthened ties with one another. The Miracle Blessed Weapon states, "The knight is one of the 3 pillars of Lothric, said to have strengthened ties with the High Priestess, after the scholars acquired the Grand Archives." We can therefore see that 2 pillars that represent tradition moved closer together. To me, this suggests that the heretical worship and the practice of the scholars was known. We know that the twins were no doubt the ones who led the scholars down this path of research, for their soul description states that they acted as spiritual mentors to the scholars of the archives, as well as their actual physical presence here, or one of them. Osiris's desperation after his failure to produce a worthy heir led him to the works of the scholars and the twins. We know that Seath's magics educated him, for the white dragon breath description reads, "Seath's research seemed to strike a chord with old Big Hat, who in his mad derobed state made divine works such as this his own. Osiris was no doubt edified by this." So, edified means instructed, spiritually in some cases, and it was no doubt heretical teachings of the scholars, which made him become obsessed with Seath the Scaleless. One further thing to note is the use of the word divine, which to me suggests that Seath was considered to be a godlike being and was worshipped through a pseudo-cult amongst the researchers. But why was Osiris obsessed with Seath? How could he give him the power to create a worthy heir? Well, we know that the dragons were immortal. Logan in Dark Souls 1 tells us that Seath is a true undead, thanks to the primordial crystal that he pillaged. His soul also seems to have survived in some form or another to the time of Dark Souls 2. Osiris is not the first to seek the power of the dragons in a quest for greater power and longevity. There exists the path of the dragon, a covenant where humans attempted to gain dragon form by emulating and worshipping them. In Dark Souls 2, Aldia seems to attempt to harness the power of the dragons to escape the endless cycle. To what extent is really worthy of its own video, but it seems that Ocellotte, the Emerald Herald, was born of these efforts. It is therefore easy to see, upon learning of Seath's legacy, that Osiris attempted to claim the power for his own, to create a worthy successor. In the Consumed Garden, we can find dragonkin and evidence of dragon worship in the room behind Osiris. A dead person is performing the Path of the Dragon gesture, and we can later find the Drake blood set here. This suggests that Osiris may have been connected or instigated a dragon worshipping cult, and we could even go as far as saying that the Snake Men may be the failed experiments of his, because we know the Snake Men are in fact imperfect dragons or failed dragons. Osiris's obsession with creating an heir through the means of dragon eugenics is no doubt one of the reasons his wife and the Queen of Lothric, or Guinevere, left, for the divine blessing tells us. The Queen of Lothric, married to the former king Osiris, was initially revered as a goddess of fertility and bounty. After giving birth to her youngest, Ocelotte, she quietly disappeared. It was after the birth of this last child that she left, and indeed Osiris' obsession ran deep with this child in particular. We know that after Osiris became mad, he became known as a consumed king, for the dragon scale ring states, in his later years, Osiris became fascinated with dragons. After going mad, he was more commonly known as the Consumed King. Many assassins were dispatched to his domain, but none returned. The ring also tells us something else very interesting. Many assassins were dispatched to kill him. But who sent these assassins? Well, I initially read domain as Lothric, so I assumed it was the rulers of other realms. However, I now read it that the realm or domain that they were sent to was in fact the garden of his name, because this became his domain or his home. Indeed, we see it was a ruin covered with toxic and undead hollows. To me, it also appears to be quarantined, for we find cathedral knights at entrance locations. It could be that the royal family sealed off Osiris's domain in an attempt to contain his madness. It seems to me that currently it is the twin princes that rule, and indeed the divine blessing describes Osiris as the former king, suggesting he now no longer rules, and maybe it was the new ruling body who tried to have him assassinated. When we finally meet Osiris in the gardens of the same name, he is very dragon-esque, and therefore has been granted some degree of success. Indeed, he specifically seems to take after Seath, both in appearance and with the use of his crystal magics. We also know he was infatuated with Moonlight from the description of the greatsword of the same name. Moonlight is associated with Seath, and it again highlights that he was trying to claim Seath's power for his own. However, it was not a complete success. His moniker of Consumed would suggest he is consumed by madness, deluded. His physicality is also warped and abnormal. He isn't a perfect dragon. He also seems to believe he is cradling his own child, for he holds his hand in such a manner, and states,
You ignorant slaves. Finally taken notice, have you? Of the power of my beloved Ocelotte, child of dragons.
His use of power and beloved seems to suggest that his son, Ocelotte, is the culmination of his life's work, a worthy successor. But he isn't holding anything, although he believes we are a slave, a subject, who has come to claim his son's power. Two things are suggested to me. One, that he is simply mad, and he doesn't realise there's nothing there. But also Seath the Scaleless was blind, and Osiris seems to resemble the pale drake. Could it not follow that he is also blind? His eye sockets certainly look empty. For whatever reason, it looks to be that he thinks his son is present. As the fight progresses, he becomes more and more deranged, asking for Ocelotte to come out, before flying into a bestial rage. He refers to Ocelotte as being born of dragons, therefore suggesting that he believes himself to be a dragon. Killing this deluded deformity seems like mercy by the end. But where is Ocelotte? Well, we know he's a boy, and his father states he is born of dragon. To me, this suggests that he was conceived when Oceiros was in his quote-unquote dragon form. Also, it may be nothing, but note the similarity between Ocelotte and Shanalotte. Perhaps the endings of these names has something to do with the fact they are both born of dragons. Ocelotte is dead. To me, this is the logical conclusion. After the loss of his last hope, he has been driven insane, and he is broken and over the edge. But how did he die? Well, one, and this is the least likely to me, Osiris killed him through his experimentation. Most likely to me is that the child died in birth, or just after. Why do I think this? Well, the divine blessing states that the queen left after the birth of her youngest. Would she not at least wait until the child was older, or take it with her? Also, the timing would make sense. The miscarriage or caught death of an infant would certainly be enough to make a wife leave her deluded husband. Secondly, if the child was also conceived after his transformation, surely they would have given birth to an abomination. Seath the Pale Drake was an albino dragon, an infertile one. That is even if dragons reproduced in the first place, which I highly doubt anyway. If a half-albino dragon man tried to conceive a child, what are the odds of the child being well and healthy? None. He is cradling air as he would a newborn, as he probably did his stillborn child, and this has driven him over the edge, and driven his queen far from her home. A sad tale, indeed. Remember that this is my conjecture. Feel free to disagree, but this is what I like to believe the story of Oceiros and his youngest child would be. If we go back to the ashes of Lothric, it would seem that Ocellotte was conceived to play a role in the linking of the fire. However, there are two other members of the royal family who were not interested in such things. The twin princes, Lorien and Lothric. Despite the title Twin Princes, I do not believe them to be twins. I may be wrong, but I think this is more to do with their entwined soul, which I will deal with later. Yes, Lorien could still be the elder and a twin. I think such a description of him means he is the elder brother in the more straightforward sense. It doesn't particularly matter one way or the other, but it is something I wanted to bring up. However, if they were twins, it would be nice to note that one was raised as a warrior and the other a scholar. First, we will deal with Lorien, the elder prince. Lorien was raised as a warrior. We know this because his armour set states, "This black dyed brass armour was passed down to him from the royal family." Lorien, raised as a knight, is said to have been left mute and crippled by his younger brother's curse. It is also said that Lorien, in fact, wished it so. I will return to the matter of their curse later, but for now, the armour confirms that Lorien was raised as a knight, and his armour was an heirloom, which suggests that the royal line may have been a line of great warriors. Indeed, when we meet Lorien, he clearly is more physically imposing, albeit crippled, than his younger brother. We can learn some of his great feats as a warrior from the description of his greatsword, which states, "Before Lorien embraced his brother's curse, he was a knight who single-handedly slayed the demon prince." Lorien was clearly a great warrior, and whether this is an exaggerated tale or not, it is fair to assume that his peers and subjects would have seen him as a great warrior hero. When we meet Lorien, he is dangerous, but he's not what we'd expect. He fights from his knees and acts like a beast. So what happened to our knightly hero? Well, both item descriptions talk of his brother's curse, which he himself willingly embraced, which emphasises the brotherly bond that these two had. What is clear is that he sacrificed his body and his voice, and this is the reason we see him like he is in the game. Lothric, the younger prince, is the bearer of the curse, who Lorien embraced. Lothric is the younger, sickly brother of Lorien. Where Lorien is strong, he is feeble, but it is clear he possesses a potent mind. It seems, in keeping with the family's obsession with worthy heirs, great things were expected of Lothric, so named in honour of the kingdom itself, and his outfit, the prayer set, tells us, "The prince, destined to be a lord of Cinder, was cherished by the royal family, despite being born into illness, a frail and shriveled child. His swaddling clothes are made of aged coarse cloth, used in an ancient prayer, and are all he has ever worn." Lothric was loved by the royal family, probably the favoured child of the bloodline. Lorien's commitment to his younger brother is a clear indicator of this. He was destined to be a Lord of Cinder. Cynical though I am, Destiny in Dark Souls to me is a device used by those in power to force a duty upon someone else, i.e. the chosen undead from Dark Souls 1, and it therefore suggests to me that Lothric was raised as a noble sacrifice to link the fire. We know from the ashes that the bloodline was obsessed with creating such. However, he was not born physically strong like his brother, and he grew to be feeble. His special blade, which was forged for him, never saw use, for its description reads, Prince Lothric's straight sword, blessed by Emma with potent magic. Young Lothric was meant to be a champion, and was expected to wield this platinum sword, but some things will remain distant dreams forever. We can see that Lothric was expected to be a champion, wielding this mighty and dazzling sword, proving himself to be the Lord of Cinder and the champion of the kingdom he shares a name with. This image is reflected in the statues of Lothric wielding the sword. This was clearly the ideal that was behind the prince. However, the reality is, Lothric was no warrior, nor did he have any intention on taking on the mantle of Lord of Cinder. The sword's description also points to another of Lothric's relationships, and that is with High Priestess Emma, who not only blessed his weapon and watched over him, but also wet-nursed him, for the ring of the priestess states, the High Priestess also served as the prince's wet nurse. Now, it isn't clear if she always served the princes as a wet nurse, as tradition, but what is clear to me, that there certainly existed a relationship between herself and Lothric, whom she clearly helped raise. He is quite childlike after all. His outfit tells us he has never grown out of his swaddling clothes, and this is most likely to do with his physicality, rather than him being childlike in the mind. Upon defeating 3 Lords of Cinder, you are called back to Emma. She is dying, and she says Prince Lothric is in our hands. Please save his soul. Tell him what he must be, a lord. So she tells us that we must save his soul by forcing him into a duty as a lord and sacrificing him for the greater good. She clearly believes his soul is at risk because he has renounced his duty. Why is she dying? Well, if you remember the first time we meet her, she is sitting in front of the castle access, blocking our route. She quickly directs you away from here, emphasising that the Lords of Cinder are not here. This is a lie. One is here. Why did she lie? To protect someone she raised from infancy, and we can all certainly appreciate that. She deceives us, but once we have returned the other lords to their throne, she realises that the time has come, and Lothric must do his duty that he is trying to shirk. She can protect him no longer, and the greater good must come first. But this does not make it any easier for her, so she kills herself, before telling us to tell Lothric to embrace his duty, and handing us the basin we need to proceed. Lothric will not come willingly. He says,
Mind you, the mantle of Lord interests me none. The fire-linking curse, the legacy of lords, let it all fade into nothing.
He does not care for the cycles or the linking of the flame. Their soul also tells us the 2 princes rejected their duty to become Lords of Cinder and settled down far, far away to watch the fire fade from a distance. The princes are waiting this out, watching the fire fade from the comfort of their throne room. They disagree with their preordained roles. But why? Well, one of the princes, who I assume to be Lothric from his dialogue, seems to have had a tutor growing up, for the spell Soul Stream tells us the first of the scholars doubted the linking of the fire and was alleged to be a private mentor to the royal prince. This scholar was clearly the first of the group that would become the pillar of the same name. This we could take as fact. However, the language used here is highly reminiscent of a previous character, Aldea, scholar of the First Sin, brother to King Vendrick of Drangleic. Everything I have said and will say about Aldea is highly speculative, so absolutely feel free to disagree with my argument. The words for scholar are what made my ears pick up, as Aldea was the scholar of the First Sin, and may have been the founding member of the scholar caste as well. We meet Aldea in Dark Souls 2, who postulates questions to us throughout our journey, querying what choice we will make regarding the linking of the fire, or not, and what our motives are for these, what we hope to achieve. At the end of the game, however, he suggests that we try escaping the linking, beyond the reach of light and dark, avoiding perpetuating the cycle itself, being outside the cycle. This is my interpretation of his dialogue, and to me it matches what we know of the prince's scholar. To me, the language is too much of a coincidence, and I would like to think that it was Aldea who imparted his lifetime of study to the young Prince Lothric. Feel free to disagree. Whoever this scholar was, he disagreed with the conventional view of linking of the fire, a role which Lothric was actually prepared for. Yet this teaching has clearly had a profound influence on the young man, and he seems prepared to die before playing any role in the linking of the fire, probably because of his education. This is why we must collect the ash of Prince Lothric from his dead body, but his brother stands in our way, so the time has come to tackle the subject of their bond and their curse. It seems that Lorien became cursed through choice to support his brother, yet Lothric seems to be the original source of the curse. His closing description tells us that he was born into illness, feeble and weak, so it is a definite possibility that he was in fact born with the curse. However, there is another possibility that I'd like to propose. He is sickly and ill, but this is separate from his curse, and he was later cursed by something or someone. Why? Maybe he was cursed because of his refusal to follow the preordained path. This is definitely possible. He would have irked a lot of people in his refusal to become a Lord of Cinder. There is a further possibility. We know from Lothric's ash that the family resorted to unspeakable means when trying to forge the perfect heir. I have spoken about Oceiros' work with dragons. However, what if Lothric was subject to his father's experiments? Through the course of the experiments, he may well have become the subject of a curse, and this is my favourite explanation thus far. While on this chain of thought, we can see feathers all over the throne room. Was Lothric experimented on the scholar's interest and research into the angels? Considering Oceiros' connection to the scholars, it is a real possibility. Of course, the feathers could mean anything else, that the angels attacked the royal family. I refer you to my Angelic Faith video for an in-depth analysis, but suffice it to say, the Angelic Faith and their followers took up arms against the establishment, and we could be looking at evidence of an attack on the royals. There is also the possibility that the angels visited the princes, and considering they rejected traditional religious views of their contemporaries, perhaps they found solace in an alternate faith. My favourite is still the possibility that the feathers are the remnants of an experiment, and shout out to my many viewers and commenters who put me on this track with their comments. Whatever the reason, Lothric is cursed, and to me it is a unique curse, not the undead curse. Lorien, for whatever reason, decides to embrace it. However he did it, this curse is what made the bond between the two even stronger, and their conjoined soul states, a curse, makes their souls nearly inseparable. So the use of the plural here shows us they once had individual souls, but the curse has bound it together. As their souls have conjoined, so has their weapon. We can make the twin princes' sword when we have both their weapons, combining them together. This sword's description states, sword forged from the reunion of the inseparable swords, born from the souls of Lothric and Lorien, the twin princes. Their union is rooted in a curse and perpetuated by grief. The swords unite as their souls do. The sword reinforces the fact that the curse is the reason for their current state. The latter part suggests that grief is the reason they continue to be united so. But grief for what? Their fate? Or the fact they were meant for a role they never wanted? As we enter the throne room, Lothric says, "Oh dear, another dogged contender." This suggests we aren't the first to attack them, and Lorien is the first to come at us, loyally protecting his brother, who he willfully became a cripple for, and we would expect no less, When Lorien falls, we can see the true extent of their bond, and this curse. Whatever the curse is, and however it came to be, it keeps Lorien from death by allowing Lothric to rise him up, who says,
Rise if you would, for that is our curse.
This could be indicative to some that the curse is the curse of the undead, but to me it isn't. To me this is more. It means that they cannot die separately. They are one. That is their curse, their shared burden that they must shoulder together until their death, their joint death. The second phase of the fight shows their true bond. They fight as one, Lorien's great strength, augmented by his brother's magics. This curse has not only enfeebled them, but made them one being, a Lord of Cinder after all. To me, the details of their curse is largely irrelevant, aside from the fact that it's debilitating, both physically and mentally, for Lorien especially. What is more important is how it gives real form to the bond between these brothers. It is a physical embodiment of their love for one another, and they become inseparable, as they probably were anyway, but in a more physical sense. At least Lorien, and maybe both, accepted the consequences of this, but nonetheless they wished to be together forever. Lorien was a strong warrior and a royal prince, yet he gave everything up to be with his brother and to help shoulder his burden. I believe this to be Lorien's motive, that he wanted to support his younger brother through his curse, his younger brother who he clearly loved. And in a lot of ways, their relationship is one of the very pure examples of behaviour, especially with regards to Lorien, that we see in Dark Souls. It makes this fight all the more tragic to me. A strong but ultimately handicapped man fights us to defend his beloved feeble younger brother, yet we must strike them both down for no other reason than they have a duty they need fulfilled, a duty they wanted nothing to do with. So thanks for joining me there, guys. That is my take on the Lothric royal family and my analysis of the curse of the twin princes. Now I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any comments regarding disagreeing with my arguments, please feel free. There's quite a lot of speculation and conjecture in that one, but that's fine, and that's what is great about this game. I have some more exciting stuff coming up on my channel, guys, so feel free to subscribe and like and stick around for the new content that's coming. Thank you very much.